Due to the peculiar structure of the Buddhist philosophy, most persons who have studied it have regarded Buddhism very largely as an intellectual or philosophical approach to life. While this is true, the approach is rather larger and more inclusive than we might at first imagine. There has to have been some reason beside abstract metaphysics to cause Buddhism to spread throughout Asia and also to gain a very large following among very simple people. These people were not influenced so much by the psychology of Buddhism as by its powerful devotional impact. If, therefore, modern writers, particularly Western students, have more or less overlooked the emotional content in Buddhism, it is perhaps not because they were not aware of its existence, but because they were writing for a Western type of mind and felt that these subtleties would be lost on the Occidental. Going through the great discourses as they are recorded directly to Buddha, we are therefore not surprised to find that there is a much greater religious and devotional content, but that this content is under the broad pattern of a strong moral, ethical discipline. Buddha's emphasis was upon discipline rather than upon any failure to include the various phases of human consciousness and activity. Therefore, in his teaching, he gives us a doctrine of disciplined human affection. And we can quote a very simple statement that appears several times in the Buddhist canon, namely that the end of the doctrine is that all beings shall be happy. The struggle of Buddhism was against suffering, and that which is against suffering would theoretically be for contentment, for peace of mind and peace of soul, and for all those tranquil concepts and ideals which bring with them the sense of individual or collective security. Buddha therefore states definitely that it is the end of his doctrine that all beings shall be happy. By beings he includes not only human beings, but all creatures in nature and in the invisible worlds around us. He desired for everything a deep and abiding contentment of spirit, and that this contentment of spirit was not supposed to be cold, detached, dull, or so negatively impersonal as to deprive the human being of companionship, comradeship, friendship, and affection. So on the basis of his thinking, we would like to analyze certain ideas which are present in several discourses, in which he summarizes what he calls the principles of the holy life. And in this summary or summation of his doctrine, he gives us the concept of a holy life that is very warm, that is very meaningful, that it is not the asceticism with which we are most commonly reminded or associated. It is a kind of detachment that is still filled with value, filled with understanding, and with moving forces. Therefore, he says in one of the discourses that the value of the discipline of the mind is not 1/16 as important as the pure love of the heart. Now, this term 16th is an Eastern phrase or structure which we can interpret by almost any type of a superlative comparison. We might say 1,000 times greater, or 100 times greater, or infinitely greater. The 16th, therefore, signifies a kind of infinite rather than merely a mathematical figure. It is an Eastern form of speech. What he means, therefore, is that the disciplines of the mind are not even to be compared in the merit of salvation with those disciplines which affect the heart and which help the individual to become a truly loving creature. He then goes on to tell us something about love. And he tells us its values and its shortcomings as we understand the term. He points out that to most persons, affections are a form of instinct, that individuals bestow their emotional intensities according to the attitudes which they hold. Therefore, if the individual is without internal enlightenment, his attitudes naturally will be more aggressive and actually more physical than they will be in the case of the person who has deeply mellowed and enriched his life. Therefore, Buddha points out that only the individual who has begun to understand real value is capable of great love. That instead of this kind of love, we are most burdened with a selfish form of emotion, an emotion that does not arise from the fundamental requisites or principles upon which true love must stand. Therefore, to understand and to appreciate his point of view, we have to analyze a little with him the nature of true love. That true love is not merely a personal emotion. That true love is not directed toward things. That true love is a complete level of consciousness, a level so enriched and so deepened that it becomes an ever-present help in time of trouble. He uses several analogies which are a little distant from our present experience, but I have framed them together into a new analogy which is consistent and appropriate to his thinking. We may say, therefore, in the mind of Buddha, that hate or any of the negative emotions may be regarded as a kind of poison. Now, if this poison is placed in a thimble and we drink it, it is very likely that we will die. But if this same amount of poison is placed in a great lake or in a beautiful pool or pond, we may still drink of the water, but we shall not be poisoned. The reason why is that the power of the poison will be so vastly diluted by the bulk of the water that the greater the amount of water, the less effect the poison will have. Thus, into the oceans of the world, the refuse of man is flowing constantly. Into the rivers and streams, the pollutions of nature are continually flowing. Yet because of the vastness of these, they purify themselves. Buddha uses this analogy, or one similar to it, to say that in the vastness of love, true love, that no evil thing can retain its harmfulness, but is gradually purified because man's internal capacity for the conscious expression and practice of love is so vast that if all the hatred of the world were put together, it could not pollute this tremendous and eternal capacity for goodness. And all these poisons flowing into universal love will be purified, and that love will not be contaminated. and man can continue to receive nourishment from this universal emotion without sickness and without evil to himself. Therefore, Buddha points out that the trouble with most of us is that when an evil thing comes into us, our love and our understanding is not great enough. Therefore, we capture it in a very small cup, and drinking of that cup, we perish. Whereas if we could capture it in the universality of ourselves, we could accept it without danger, without fear, and most of all, without the impulse to retaliate. Thus, Buddha gives us another very important phase of his doctrine, namely that true love differs from human affection in its infinite capacity to transmute that which is not like itself. We are reminded also of the Christian concept that if we do good to those who do good to us, there is little merit. But if we do good to those who despitefully use us, there is great merit. And Buddha attempts to explain how the individual, without hypocrisy, without a sense of remorse, without misgiving, can reach that degree of consciousness in which he can do good to all things, whether they are kind or unkind to him, and that the kindness or unkindness of others cannot touch true love, cannot cause us to depart from the great foundations of our basic affections. When man is disappointed, disillusioned, hurt in various ways, this emotional suffering that arises within him affects his total being, causing him to react intellectually through hatred, through suspicion, jealousy, envy, or anger. Yet if within himself he has the power of the great ocean of being, into which he can accept all things and be truly unmoved, he has a magnificent capacity to transform every evil thing, every shadow, every darkness of life, and never permit it to flow again from him. Buddha warns that the poisons of our emotions form a kind of contagion or infection. The individual who is hurt turns and hurts another. This one in turn, unable to understand why he has been so injured, turns again and hurts a third person. Thus the hurt goes on, descending in families, moving through communities, and becoming part of the negative legacy which the past gives to the present and the future. Thus these hatreds become the basis of war between nations, become the basis of antisocial activities throughout society. Always because the individual who is hurt passes on his hurt. Now he passes this on in two ways. First, by a deliberate impulse to revenge himself, by means of which he believes that an injury done to him justifies that he shall commit an injury against another, particularly against the person who has injured him. Thus these injuries mount, become greater, increase in magnitude and intensity, until misunderstandings are fanned into hatreds, and all hope of reconciliation is lost. The second way in which we perpetuate the poisons that we accept out of life is that we cause these poisons to so create such a toxin in our own life that we become uncompanionable. We are no longer kindly, friendly people. We develop quick and unpleasant tempers, and one by one, those who are around us depart, or are hurt, or are indignant and unhappy because of our conduct. Thus, as we slowly injure ourselves, we become less helpful, even though we may attempt with patience and resignation to accept injury, if with this acceptance there is not what Buddha calls the gladness of understanding, it is not enough that we shall not return the evil. It is more important that we shall alchemically transmute that evil immediately in ourselves, so that it will not injure us any more than we would permit it to injure another. Buddha points out that this type of thinking, this type of understanding, is not natural to the untutored person. Our instincts are too strong, our appetites are too powerful, and our own internal concept of affection is too personal and too highly conditioned. Thus we use the instruments available to us, and these instruments contribute to calamity. It is therefore essential that all growth shall arise from growth of understanding, that the individual cannot do better than he truly believes. And if he is not doing well enough, then his true believing is not good enough. He must improve it. It must be given the power to work in his life. Now, Buddha points out that we are surrounded with great and noble codes that have been given to us from our ancestors and form the spiritual heritage of our race. We accept these codes. We believe in them. We would like to live them. But in our own immediate and personal situations, we are not strong enough to cling to them. Or if we cling at all, it is with desperation, with a terrible conflict in which we struggle to be true to principle in the presence of temptation. Buddha points out that such struggle itself is vanity, that if understanding is once great enough, we can accept into the ocean of our own inner life all things, and that ocean will not change, will not become storm-moved, nor will it become polluted by all the sorrow and suffering that may be cast into it out of our thinking, our emotions, or our actions and contacts with others. This Buddha searches for the true principle of love. And he finds this true principle of love in the beginning, in the rise of man's natural willingness to sacrifice for some things. Thus he finds, in starting his program of thought, that he can contact many persons on the level of the importance of unselfishness, that he can find numerous factual incidents in which individuals have achieved this, therefore that it is not impossible nor improbable, but is due very largely to the emotional content of our own lives. He pointed out in his discourses that the father and mother do not have great sorrow and pain in sacrificing for the good of their children. The honorable man does not find it impossible to labor for the maintenance of his family. And if sacrifice must come, he is not unable to give up the things that he wants in order to protect those that he loves. In the simple human way, therefore, we have an emergency where relationships are right, this dawning of a kind of love that is superior to gratification. Buddha goes into this psychologically, however, and points out that perhaps there is some gratification even in this. The individual finds a kind of joy in giving of himself to those who need him. Yet this is a better joy, Buddha points out, than that kind of joy which comes only from the gratification of our own selfishness. And he points out also that those who have experienced this better joy do not naturally wish to return to the old way. They have found that this kind of joy, though more serious, though perhaps involving greater self-control, also has a greater reward in peace of mind and peace of soul and openness of heart. Therefore, Buddha points out that there is really greater fulfillment in loving than there is in being loved. That the great joy of the individual is to give of himself, and that in the giving of himself, he attains the greatest internal maturity for himself. If, however, he is asked to give of himself to one who has injured him, or he is asked to make sacrifices to those with whom he has very little close association, then it is more difficult for him, and he is likely to return again to the preservation of self-interest. Therefore, Buddha points out that man must gradually discover within his own being the ocean of consciousness. He must gradually outgrow the very concept of that which is his and that which belongs to another. He must outgrow the concept that there is a stranger, that there is in this world anything except a growing life, an unfolding of beings toward light, and that regardless of their conduct or their actions, due to the limitation of their perspectives, all beings are by nature and quality lovable. They can be loved if we can find the good in them. This searching for the good, however, to many is too difficult a task, and also one that is sufficiently contrary to their immediate instincts so that they overlook it. They pass by it. But their reward is not that they have failed to find good in another. Their reward is, or their punishment is, that they have lost an opportunity to experience good in themselves. Buddha points again to the fact that the only answer that we have to the confusion of human behavior is the recognition of this basic bigness, this vastness that can absorb into itself all the poisons of littleness, that there can be no solution unless the person who drinks the poison is stronger than the poison, that the individual who is injured is greater than the injury. If he returns like for like, he will poison another man, and there will be two deaths. And two evils will not make a right, nor can they bring to an end the suffering of mankind. We all desire to be happy, and Buddha brought to the world his concept of how to be happy. And one of his basic convictions was that in order to be happy, we must love without restraint, without limit imposed by prejudice or opinion. But out of the deepness of ourselves, we must have an affection that is vast enough, complete enough, so that we can live in the world as it is and learn to understand and respect the world as it is. And regardless of what is occurring to ourselves, that we shall live here and depart from here, leaving behind us what is called the noble example. The noble example to the truth seeker of other times to come, the example of the individual who was larger than hate, who maintained the beauty and tranquility and internal peace of enlightenment, not as a cold intellectualism, but as a warm fraternal realization, close to the life of all things with whom we come in contact. In the garden of his palace in Kapilavastu, when Buddha faced the four mysterious visions or dreams that came to him, the last and greatest was the vision of the shaven-headed monk, walking quietly in the garden, unmoved and untouched by worldliness. But in the face of this monk was not only the serenity of a great soul, but the infinite tenderness of the great loving one. It was this tenderness that called the young prince from a throne, caused him to renounce worldliness, and to dedicate his life to the service of this wonderful gentleness, by means of which man can give the great example and at the same time can find in himself the fullness of his own spiritual needs. Thus we have in the concept of Buddhism, therefore, the universalization of affection. Not in the sense that it becomes so vast we no longer understand it ourselves, but because out of the simple experience of living, we come to realize that most of our troubles are due to the failure of ourselves to understand. That we criticize other people because they do not understand us. Yet at the same time, our understanding is not great enough to rise above the level of their conduct and grasp totally at the reality of themselves. We are not able to be bigger than our adversary. Therefore, we accept upon his level the things that he does to us, and we are hurt as he would be hurt, and as he expects us to be hurt. Or perhaps because we have appeared to be stronger and wiser and have spoken learnedly of things, he hopes and expects that we will understand and be patient. But we are not. And he loses not only his faith in us, but his faith in the principles which we claim to represent. Thus, in the search for realities, we move upon this tremendous level of trying to understand what is meant by the purity and nobility of affection. That this affection must cut through the limitations which we have imposed upon it. And Buddha explains that to us, love must always be directed against something. It must be toward that which is away from ourselves. We therefore pour forth our love upon some other person. And upon the reactions of that person, our code of affection is built. If that person is true, we glorify love. If that person is not true, we then turn against affection, becoming embittered. We have trusted our entire understanding of affection upon the reactions of those toward whom we express affection. It is even more complicated than this, because in expressing our affection, we have expressed mostly our own thinking. We resolve in our own minds what love is and what it is good to do for another. Then out of our own ignorance or comparative ignorance, we proceed to, in the name of love, attempt to indoctrinate or dominate that other person. We feel that what we want for them is the proof of our affection for them, and also that their regard for us is based upon their acceptance of our desire or purpose. Buddha therefore warns us of what he terms conditioned love. Love that imposes a requirement. Love that says, I will love you if you do as I wish you to. I will love you if you agree with me. I will love you if you will love me. I will love you if, regardless of my thinking, you are always patient, whether I am patient or not. Thus, love has upon itself, in most instances, these requirements, and we demand its fulfillment in the terms of expectancy. Socrates declared, the man who criticizes me most truly loves me. This is not our attitude. Our attitude means very largely, if you will love me, agree with me. If you love me, make me happy. If you love me, do the things I want you to do. Thus love becomes a subtle net, a kind of snare that captures people within it. Whereas Buddha so well points out that love is man's offering freedom to his friend. That love is the individual releasing the other person into the fullness of himself. Love may attempt to guide or direct where need arises. But love also that is wise, that is rooted in understanding, becomes more skillfully able to direct, whereas blind emotion or blind devotion does not have this skill. On the psychological level, Buddha points out that when we advise another or attempt to help another, we are advising and helping from the level of our own attainment. This attainment is a peculiar thing, arising out of our own dharma and karma. This attainment is limited, conditioned, restricted by our own inclinations and our own experiences and by our own environment and the innumerable psychological forces that move in upon us. When, therefore, in our affection, we demand obedience, it means we are asking other persons to accept the total result of our experience and apply it to themselves. Their experience may not require this, nor will our own achievement truly justify a dogmatic attitude on our part. While we tell others how to live, we may be living badly ourselves. While we beseech another person to be kind, we may be unkind. And while we ask our children to grow in virtue, we may lack the very virtue we preach to them. Thus it is a very difficult thing for the individual to express affection practically, or to give others the full service of his life, unless in addition to his good intention, there is also a constant growing depth within himself, a serenity within his own consciousness, by means of which he gains contact with deeper interpretations of law and principle in life. Thus, the person who truly loves, truly fits himself to love. He places upon himself such rules and regulations as will make it possible for him to serve wisely. To merely desire to serve is, as Buddha points out, a passion. But if this passion so grows that we fit ourselves by every possible sacrifice, if necessary, so that our service will be true, then this is no longer passion. This is a depth of understanding by which we become capable of doing the good we would like to do. To wish to do good is weakness. To be able to do good arises out of consciousness, out of the gradual unfoldment of the powers of our own internal security. Buddha therefore points out that the way to love is the way to serenity. That true love arises in a spirit that is not moved by negative passions and instincts. The true love comes to the degree that we have found peace. That love is not to bring us peace. That love is to result from peace. That the individual who is capable of achieving a perfect affection is the person who has already achieved a great serenity of spirit, a great depth, a true paternity of consciousness, and the gradual transformation of all these pressures into the noblest kind of kindly, gentle inducement, always recognizing the right of the other person to make decision for himself. But most persons' decisions are most influenced by the examples of those who seek to teach them. Thus, as these examples become more beautiful, more noble. The teaching progresses more rapidly. In the matter of affection, therefore, Buddha tells us that there must be a kind of love that is a love in itself. Not a love of itself, but in itself. A love that does not require fulfillment in any particular term, but a love that is in itself both its own need and its own fulfillment. That man must not need to seek by bondaging others for the fulfillment of his own love. Love does not depend upon the world being what he wants it to be, does not depend upon the removal of obstacle, does not depend upon a career free of disillusionment, nor necessarily an easy and placid way of life. Love has nothing much to do with these things, because it arises like understanding and wisdom and truth itself from the deep, unseen sources of universality at the root of human consciousness. Therefore, love in a way is consciousness. Love in a way is God, because it represents the same universality. We look around us and we observe an infinite diversity of life, all growing, all developing under love law, all fulfilling, sometimes with apparent cruelty, yet underneath it all, a universal life forever guiding. A man's inability to understand is simply his own ignorance and not the weakness or failure of this life itself. It follows, therefore, that the divine consciousness, which maintains the life in the tiniest little creature, and at the same time swings the orbs in their endless march through the sky, that this consciousness has something so total in it that it nourishes all things, and it nourishes them whether they be fair or foul to our understanding. It is something of this universal love that Akhenaton in Egypt sensed and tried to express. This God love that is in both the enemy and the friend. And while the friend and the enemy may not know how to meet, still the meeting is there, could they discover it. And most of this great meeting is attained by what in the West we have a tendency to call forgiveness. To us, forgiveness is our own statement of being larger than an injury. Forgiveness is our ability to retain certain benevolent attitudes, although we have been outraged in some particular. Forgiveness, however, to Buddha is not really enough, because forgiveness is a gesture. It is a sense of our own self-superiority, granting some form of mercy upon another. Forgiveness is less than insight, because insight will bring with it the action which we call forgiveness, but with it also a total understanding of value, which forgiveness may not be able to achieve. Thus, through insight, through true conscious insight, we move victoriously toward the achievement of great love. Buddhism, therefore, develops a new term and calls this term compassion. And this compassion, to the Buddhist way of thinking, is man's total love for life, man's total ability to accept life, and to accept it for what it is, the beautiful necessity through which we must all pass in experience. And that this compassion has nothing to do with our common personal feelings. He tells us, for example, that we cannot imagine a passionate compassion. We can't imagine a passionate love or a passionate desire. Nor can we imagine, shall we say, an intolerant compassion. We cannot conceive of these larger and impersonal values being subject to the same qualifications and modifications as earthly emotional attitudes and desires. He therefore tells us that compassion is not the deficiency of love, nor is it love so universally diluted that nothing remains to give glory or beauty to personal action. Buddha points out that the compassion principle really enriches all affection, because it makes affection deeper than surfaces. It makes it stronger than the violations which block our general acceptance of affection. And most of all, compassion gives us this increasing sense of sharing in the total life of our creatures and of the beings which will become happy, according to Buddha's doctrine. Therefore, compassion does not destroy the love between man and wife, or between parent and child. But without compassion, human love itself may fail. Because human love is a fragile thing, as we well know from the broken homes that burden us today. The intensities of our passions will not achieve security of our true affection. Therefore, we must have something else, which Buddha terms compassion. And this compassion is something that is more the attitude that we assume that God holds toward all creatures. That in some mysterious way we can bring all our failings, our limitations, our mistakes into the presence of the divine, and that this divine power knows better than we are even able to say. That in this divine power there is an infinite kindliness that goes on forever. And that is, this kindliness is in some way our hope, for without it, our faults might bring upon us a horrible retribution. In some religious teachings, this horrible retribution is still present and is placed over us as a kind of deterrent against evil. Buddha, however, teaches or taught that nowhere in this great world of space can there be a destructive or truly negative factor. The human soul is not subject to damnation because it exists forever in the total love of the universe. Therefore, as damnation is the result of a perspective, a limited viewpoint upon a limitless fact, so surely, when in our private opinion we quietly damn someone, or we curse them, or we turn against them wishing them ill and seeking to contribute to their sorrow, we are really carrying on this false doctrine, this doctrine in which we have not placed ourselves firmly and eternally in the presence of total love, total understanding. Buddha points out also that to the degree that we can totalize this concept of love, the suffering caused by passion gradually diminishes. The individual who cannot hate has already cut out of his life one of the most terrible and most malignant of all emotions. He is therefore free, and therefore the love and beauty in him has greater expression. And where others might, under the same condition, depart and remain miserable for years, he is not miserable, because he has already reached the point, not where he is immune to hate, but where he has accepted hate with love and transmuted this hatred in himself so that it can no longer injure him nor cause him to hold grudge or grievance against another. Therefore, Buddha pointed out to his monks and disciples that if you go into some other land or into some place far away, and there you are treated badly, and you are injured, or even you are killed, or you are accused falsely, or various things are done to you to humiliate you, to ridicule you, to persecute you, he said, remember always that your great defense is love, that you have no other. And regardless of the cost to yourself in anything, you must cling eternally to your power to love those who do evil to you. That for not one moment can you cease to love them, even as you would still love a small child that in its ignorance has done some slighting or unkind thing to its parent. You know that this child does not know. And as you go out into the world, you must know that there are grown persons who are still children, and that all those who hurt because they do not know. Therefore, you do not share because you do know. And because you know, you can love when they cannot. Therefore, in returning love for that which is not love, or returning greater enlightenment for that which is not enlightened, you in this way add nothing to the sorrow of the world. You cause no feuds. You cause no individual to turn to another and hate. You remain simply deep in the realization that you can love everything that exists, because nothing exists that finally is not God, and therefore not worthy of your affection. In these ways, the Arhat, or the saint, develops a strange and wonderful alchemical power. And it is reported throughout the history of Buddhism how these gentle persons going into the most dangerous places not only survived, but transformed these places, bringing education and enlightenment, and gradually winning the respect and admiration of those who did not really understand, but could feel something in themselves. It touched their love, which had been sleeping so long. Then also, Buddha points out that love arises from a kind of right-mindedness, that it arises from the kind of thinking which is forever seeking generous thoughts, which gradually loses the instinct to seek for darkness. We have a tendency strong within our natures to be critical. We have an instinct to recognize more of the vices than we do of the virtues. We also have some negative persuasion in us that causes us to expect evil. And Buddha warns that all these negative habits moving in upon us can destroy right-mindedness, can cause us to gradually be incapable of fairness. That we have been insulted 1,000 times does not permit us to be unfair the next time. That we have been neglected does not make it right for us to neglect, nor does the number of neglect cause us the rightness to declare the world to be neglectful. All things are incidents and separate things. And because what happens to us is suspended so closely from our own conduct, and we come so near to those rewards which are justly and properly our own, right-mindedness, according to Buddha, causes us to seek in ourselves for the roots of our unhappiness and to change those roots in ourselves and to refrain forever from this tendency to blame others, even though another person may in thoughtlessness, ignorance, or selfishness do a thing injurious. This does not mean that we must be injured. It means, however, that if our own level is the same as theirs, if we accept as they gave, they believed they could hurt, so they performed a bad action. We believe we can be hurt, therefore we accept this bad action and suffer. Both persons are necessary to this pattern of suffering, and no individual can completely injure us or totally discomfort us unless we have a large measure of his thinking in ourselves. We are like him, or he could not move us. And as we do not appreciate or respect those parts of him which lead to hurt, we have no reason or right to admire or respect those parts of ourselves which accept hurt through lack of understanding. Thus, the injury is a proof of our own insufficiency. And if our sufficiency is great enough, we can pass through every disaster, as Buddha advised his monks, and with it all, regardless of what happens, live and die, loving life, loving the world, and sensing a wonderful goodness everywhere. And this, more than anything else available to man, calls forth goodness, calls forth in others that which is discovered in ourselves. With right-mindedness also, Buddha very clearly points out what he calls generous sympathy. A generous sympathy might seem to be a strange thing to say about a person who believes that all things arise in ourselves. And among Buddhists of some persuasions, this generous sympathy has been neglected, yet it is distinctly a part of Buddha's doctrine of love. Sympathy does not mean that we agree with those who bring us unhappy reports. But generous sympathy is this mysterious power to realize that they can suffer, and that this suffering is unavoidable to them because of the level of consciousness on which they exist. That in these needs, the individual is not merely shamming his misery. He is not to be condemned because he is unhappy. He is not to be told simply, forget yourself and be happy. Nor is he to be told, you earned it, therefore it's yours. Or if it's karma, work it out. Those are not the attitudes which Buddha advised, even though they might appear to be the simple statement of his principles. Buddha pointed out constantly that the individual must bear out of his own experience the realization that when a person in a certain level of consciousness is in trouble, that person is suffering, and that there is no immediate and instantaneous release for him, that he cannot merely be advised or reprimanded, that he cannot simply be left totally to his own resources without hope, that there has to be in this thing that is called compassion something that reaches out and in a constructive and adequate manner not only solves this mystery for ourselves, but contributes everything that can be contributed to the rescuing of the other person from suffering. Buddha points out also, of course, that even among his disciples there was suffering, for they were not perfect. They were not able to completely overcome all of these limitations and restrictions of consciousness with which man is burdened. Therefore, Buddha went further than this. He pointed out that man has a greatness that is greater than some animals, that man, therefore, is in the presence, in nature around him, of infinite growth, in infinite degrees of growth. Therefore, he does not condemn the flower because it is not a man, nor the beast because it is not a god. It is his right and his privilege to serve and preserve the growing life in the flower and in the beast. Nor is it his right to judge either, but to recognize both to be the unfolding love of God growing up in space. Therefore, this generous sympathy causes the gardener to take away the weed that endangers the plant. It causes him to strive in one way or another, that he shall not sit in an ivory tower and judge anything, but that an infinite compassion shall flow out from him to that which needs, always and forever. And this can happen because this compassion is in no way conceived as related to reward of any kind. We have the same concept again in the Christian doctrine, where we are told that the duty of the farmer is to plant the seed, but the growing is according to the will of God. It is not that man shall stand by and decree the harvest that he has earned. Rather, it is that he shall give of his compassion and leave the works of that compassion to their own fulfillment in the growth of things. Thus, compassion is not limited, nor can the compassionate person be disillusioned. We can only be disillusioned when we place some restraint, some boundary upon our own action. When we say this should produce this, then we may be disappointed. But when we only give of what we are, giving without reservation and without hope of reward, we can never be disillusioned. Yet if we give of hope with hope of reward, we are not true to the Buddhist principle of love. Because love is not hoping reward, but is giving out of the inevitability of its own existence, out of its own totality. Man does not possess love. Man does not own this emotion. It does not rise in him to be turned on and off at his pleasure. This infinite emotion abides in space and is the common property of all things that love. Therefore, man is its steward and its servant. It is his right to give it, but it is not right for him to dictate as to its action or its consequences or the motions which it shall follow in the achievement of its works. So, true understanding of this kind brings Buddha finally to the consummation of his concept of what is love. And he analyzes it, and he tries to find a word. And in translating, we try to find the word that carries his meaning as nearly as we can. He searches our terms for love and finds that they are not useful very much because of the overtones we have associated with them. The very moment that we think of love, we think of desire. We think of the rise of passions within ourselves. We think of our affections, and perhaps we become immediately melancholy at the thought that we are loveless or that our love has been betrayed. Therefore, everything that we have as a connotation of love has become semantically outraged. And when we even try to think of the love of God, we are only able to think of this love in some relation to human emotion. And there are many persons who have left religion merely because some religious person has been unkind to them. They have been unable to escape the infinite personalization of the terms that they use. Buddha also, of course, shows us how before the word love can be placed many other words, such as personal love, impersonal love, selfish love, unselfish love. These terms are perfectly proper to our thinking, and we use them every day, although the thinking itself is unreal. We do not think the term selfish love is particularly unreasonable. Yet, in a strange way, the mixture of these terms has resulted in the dilution of our conduct. We have accepted the compromise of conduct with the words until they are strangely and terribly mixed together. So Buddha is searching for a new word, something that carries with it the kind of love that he means. And he finally hit upon a term which we translate kindness. Now, kindness is a very simple word. To most Western persons, it is not ardent enough. It doesn't carry with it the tempests of affection, which we signify as necessary. There are many people who do not believe their relatives love them, unless these relatives selfishly try to possess them. And the individual who does not experience possession is not sure that they are the recipient of affection. Buddha says this is due to habit, to false mental training, and to the deluding of our senses by traditional acceptances. Kindness, however, is to us somewhat too impersonal. We can be kind to animals. We do not expect anything from these animals. We simply pat them on the head, and if they give us one great eyeful look, we are completely consoled. That's all we expect. Or if they remain with a certain note of faithfulness through the years, we begin to consider them excellent substitutes for humanity. Actually, however, perhaps when we see the little dog or the little animal and reach out our hand and pat it, it is perhaps, as Buddha would point out, the most perfect experience or example of love that we have ever exercised. First of all, it is so simple that we have overlooked it. We have certainly overlooked this power to reach out our hand and touch gently the person in trouble. We have overlooked the possibility of this kindness reaching into situations which we have deluged with remedies and which stay unmended. It is this simple, unulterior motion, this simple expression of ourselves to something from which we expect nothing, in which we express true tenderness, a truly great emotion, which because it is so slight in our experience, we have disregarded. So we say that kindliness has some mysterious power, and Buddha points out that unkindness is one of the great detrimental powers, that a tremendous amount of ill karma rises from unkindness, that this unkindness is rooted in unthoughtfulness or indifference or in pressures of one kind or another. Therefore, we have to use certain exercise of will or have to immerse ourselves in a stupid situation, or we have to be indoctrinated with false ideas before we are unkind. And as we are rescued from these ulterior and false values, the result is an increase in kindliness in our own natures. Can we love anything so much that we can be truly unkind? So we begin to rationalize this. What is kindness? Kindness may, to our mind, be the desire to tell our adversary what we think of him for his own good. Here again, however, a little analysis will frequently indicate we're not doing it for his own good. We would like to think that we are. But what we are doing it for is because it gives us a great deal of satisfaction to do it. Yet when this same person does something to us for our own good, we bitterly resent it and declare this person to be cruel and unkind. Now, kindness, of course, like the kindness of parent for child, cannot be a complete emotion without certain reservations. There must be a strong kind of kindness. And Buddha liked to believe that his doctrine, his disciplines, constituted the forces or factors to create a strong kind of kindness. A kindness which becomes a common denominator glorifying other relationships. Buddha also thought of the term friendship, but he considered that this also had fallen into ill repute, not because friendship was wrong, but because the word friendship no longer conveys the true meaning which he is seeking to grasp. And we know from our own experience that friendship is exploited, and exploited desperately by all involved in the factor. Therefore, friendship, to his mind, is more easily exploited than kindness. Kindness leaves the exploiting one in a tremendous situation of self-conviction. It is very difficult to do an ill act to a person who is truly kind. It is also very difficult to think of selfish kindliness. Or is it very easy to imagine a negative pull for kindness? We have the term unkindly. But where we can only use this unform, we are using only a reversal of the word itself. When we oppose kindness to something, it must be to cruelty or something of that nature. For kindness to Buddha represented a subtle stratum beneath things. Kindness makes the home better, even though there be frequent talk of love. Love without kindness is barren. Kindness without love is unthinkable, because in some way kindness has to carry the basic impulse of love. And the basic impulse of all love is to give of self. Therefore, kindness is a motion or action from self as directly as possible, the motive being service, the motive being encouragement, or some emotional action which has a nobler and more positive connotation. So while we can rationalize and argue kindness out of existence, Buddha points out that this rationalization of kindness is not important. It has no real bearing upon anything, because kindness is a natural instinct and impulse in those in whom life has begun to mature. And while in many instances this kindness is obscured, locked, and only capable of partial expression, still in certain situations the human being is moved to be kind. Not because his religion tells him to, not because it's going to make him more acceptable to his neighbor, but simply because he feels that way. And this feeling of basic kindness and kindliness, Buddha feels should be cultivated and could be made stronger in the life of every individual who comes in contact with other persons. Buddha also points out that this kindliness carries within it the basis of possible human relationships that can lift our world out of tragedy. Kindliness, if generously and generally practiced, would undoubtedly result in man seeking understanding, whereas now he seeks misunderstanding. Now, a man seeks negative things for two reasons. First, because he wishes to exploit them, or second, because he believes them to be true. Thus, he is taking advantage of a negative condition, or else he is accepting that which he has expected to find. The expectation is in himself. And because of this expectation, he is ever able to discover what he expects. As man changes inwardly, therefore, and his expectations change, he discovers that the world around him appears differently. And to the kind, the world is kindly. And if individuals are not kindly, this does not change the basic conviction, because this kindness is not rising from the act of another, but from the instinct of self, from within the inner part of our own experience. So Buddha gives us sympathy, kindliness, compassion as being the great terms under which love becomes the minister of human good, and that the purpose of love is to give expression and integration to these things. Persons are brought together in every conceivable relationship of life for only one essential purpose, and that is to discover truth. Regardless of the situation, there is a truth in it somewhere, and that truth has to be good. And the discovery of that truth is the solution of that situation, whatever it may be. Man seeking truth with a full heart loves that which brings him truth, whether it is immediately enjoyable or not. And having become convinced that the world is the instrument for the attainment of truth, that this machinery that has been set up has as its ultimate purpose the release of man from suffering, man can then love the world with a great love. But by discipline and by growth and by understanding and penetration, he learns the lessons at the same time. He must not think that he can love only that which teaches him nothing. In other words, only that which caters to him. This is a very negative attitude, and one which can never release the soul from suffering. Man must love most that by which the law is revealed, by which value is set up and established in his own consciousness. If, therefore, love is more important 16 times than the disciplining of the mind itself, Buddha is telling us that actually Buddhism is an escape from the tyranny of mind, and that just as man must rescue his consciousness from the tyranny of his mind, he must also rescue love from the tyranny of his attitudes. It is this rescuing that restores the sublimity of love, even as the rescuing of the mind restores the sublimity of consciousness. Therefore, consciousness and love are intimately associated. They are perhaps in their essence and substance identical. Whether they be identical or not, we do not know, but the disciplines by means of which we attain both are the same. And it is easier, as Buddha points out, to defeat the mind, to rescue the mind in its intellectual procedures, than it is to rescue the heart. Therefore, the rescuing of the heart is the 16 times greater than the rescuing of the mind. Man may rationally be converted to anything, but his instincts may remain the same. and it is to reintegrate instinct that causes the need for this Buddhist concept of constant watchfulness without tension. It is the purpose of the individual to be aware of those values which need changing. Now, Buddha gives us also this wonderful concept of awareness without tension. He tells us that we may perceive our own insufficiency without resentment or regret. We can see our faults without being proud of them or attempting to defend them or attempt to conceal them or to die of regret because we have them. These excessive attitudes are meaningless. When man perceives an insufficiency in himself, he may perceive it with a great gentleness. He may perceive it without any attitude of destruction or negation. The discovery of that which is necessary is the gentle, tensionless invitation to follow the new measure of understanding which has been attained. The moment we perceive that we are wrong, Buddha recommends that we be very grateful, because it is a sign that we have grown, and that we shall also love both this growth and the peculiar situation that gave it to us. And if we find that an unhappy situation has given us this insight, then toward this unhappy situation, we should also send the full blessing of our gratitude, because our gratitude is due to that which helps us, and adversity may be the greatest help of all. So without resentments, without regrets, we simply reach out and accept the challenge of value. And in so doing, we do it almost as we would accept a sacrament, with full contrition of spirit, with a great gentle rejoicing that we have now learned something, and that this learning will not only help us to grow, but will take from our lives one of the ways in which we have hurt others. Therefore, that the correction of one degree of ignorance in ourselves is an infinite gift to all that lives forever. Thus our gratitude goes to the experience that serves us, and we reach it, and we accept the adversary as a friend, as in the story of the Christian monk who was very devout. And one day, according to the legend, the demon appeared in his cell. And because this monk was very devout, he looked up, and for a moment he did not even realize the nature of his visitor, so he simply blessed him, and the visitor vanished. This spirit of blessing, this acceptance of all things, causes the adversary to vanish. And we discover that the adversity is in ourselves, and that as a true affection grows within us, that we no longer have to sit back and remember the sorrows we have been through. These are wiped away in what might be generously termed this generous sympathy for life, this deep understanding of value. Now, many feel that this would be a great defeatism, because they have lived on a surface of tempests and strife. But these people who are clinging desperately to the wheel of their own necessities, of their own selfishness, of their own egoism, are forever seeking help. They come every day wanting to know why these things happen to them, seeking new and better ways to revenge themselves upon their adversary, or perhaps even seeking the advice of an expert as to how they can hurt someone more efficiently. These persons are suffering. They are miserable. They are unhappy. They are sick, and many of them will shorten their lives and efficiencies, and will go out of this life embittered, and will carry this bitterness into the future. These people are not demonstrations of the success of our mortal thinking. These people do not prove that we do not need to grow. They prove conclusively that our attitudes are wrong, wrong for all concerned. And how can we go on generation after generation, individually and collectively, clinging desperately to these things that we daily see to be wrong? Buddha has only this simple answer to give, that this seeing of wrongness is not enough. The thing we must do is gain the seeing of rightness. To be constantly able to see what is wrong with the world does not solve this problem unless it moves us to the cultivation of rightness. Thus our complaint is ineffective unless we take it into ourselves and find it the impulse behind a correction of character. To love greatly, then, one must learn and understand and experience love under discipline. We must some mysterious way be educated in our affections even as we are in our thoughts. Now, actually, we think that education is imposing thought upon us. Factually, this is not true, although we try to make it true. Actually, education is helping the individual to release thought, to find instruments for the expression of his own creativity. In the same way, the disciplines upon affection are not to impose some code of east or west upon the love in man, but to impose upon the personality certain discipline by means of which true love can be released through that personality. Love does not need to be educated, but man must be better educated than he is, or he cannot know love. Love does not require the kind of education that comes merely from schooling. Therefore, it comes from experience, from loving and being loved, and from gradually realizing that all selfishness of affection destroys love, and that all selfishness of attitude profanes these great spiritual values which lie beneath our entire way of life. If, therefore, man would truly love, he may love upon the various levels of his attainments. There is, Buddha points out, great virtue in the love of the householder, that the love for parent and child shall not be relinquished in the love of truth, that the love of husband and wife shall not be relinquished in the love of humanity. For true love is a growing thing, forever including more. And if the love of humanity is not old enough, wise enough, and strong enough to preserve also the love of the child and the love of the family, then man has not learned to love. He has merely made a mental decision and has perhaps used love as an excuse to avoid immediate responsibility or to gain a glamorous career to which he is not entitled. Therefore, man loving more wisely and more beautifully does not depart from things. Rather, he enriches things. His love must grow to universal proportion. And in this larger love, there is never neglect of any personal need, but rather a purification and redemption of that need, so that the individual goes on with a more inclusive ability to love. The fact that a Buddhist arhat or mystic has learned to love many children does not mean that he would not love his own. It would mean, however, that he would love his own more wisely And he would not love his child because it is his child, but because it is truth in a little body walking in the world. He would not love his child less, but would love child in principle more. And this affection would cause no neglect to special duty, but rather an ennobling, by means of which, as the parent to one child, he may be wiser, and as the loving friend with the kindly heart to other children, he can serve them also. It is not a problem of neglect. It is a problem of the individual growing. Impersonal love does not destroy the beauty of personal love, but raises it from mortality to immortality, as the Sufi mystic has pointed out. And as a shadow of this great transition, the purification of our human emotions becomes the symbol of our attainment of universal affection. Buddha therefore points out that without love, all search for truth fails, because man really searches for truth only because of love. And without love as the basis of his search, he is servant of ambition or ulterior motive. It is not the end of wisdom that a man shall be wise. It is the end of wisdom that a man shall be good. And no man can be good without love. And there can be no true love without goodness. Therefore, skill is not given to man that he shall be skillful, but rather that he shall be good, and shall use his hands for the good of those who need. In everything that man achieves, good is the goal, and good is a consciousness. The ability of the individual to reside in the consciousness of good brings him very close to the Buddhist nirvana. And in this goodness, there is a rich warmth, a deep understanding. Buddha asks man to outgrow only the evils in things, only their weaknesses, only his own inabilities. He says that growing up will not make us love less but more, and that any individual who has grown so worldly wise that he has mistaken wisdom for good, that he has mistaken skill for integrity, that he has mistaken possession for affection, these mistakes must burden the world with sorrow. In Buddhism, therefore, perfect love is expressed in the terms of Buddha himself as the example of his own doctrine, an infinite acceptance of man as he is, and an infinite desire, the one remaining desire, to help man to be the thing that man can be. And such devotion is a great devotion. It is a great love that we should serve life and help it to grow. And in the smallest of our personal emotions, we are also serving life. And we are helping the beauty in people to grow. And we are helping the beauty in our children to grow. And we are helping the beauty in our friend to grow. And when we place the frost of negative emotion upon that beauty, we destroy something. We are no longer servants of beauty. And those who are not the servants of beauty cannot be the servants of love. So in this emotion, Buddha is simply telling us that out of our own experience, we have learned, and learned wisely, and perhaps through some bitterness have experienced, that our love is not right. Because it has not brought us love. It has not brought us peace. It has not given us the inner consolation of spirit. It has not brought us serenity. And because it has not brought these things, it cannot be love, regardless of what we call it. For the natural nature of love is that it shall bring all good things with it. Therefore, we must revise our standards. We must seek more sincerely, and we must learn the laws of love, so that we may obey them, and through obeying them, have a rich and beautiful life. This life is our prayer. It is our daily meditation. It is our continuous practice of the holy life, and in its simplicity, in its naturalness, and in its gentleness, it brings us finally into attunement or at one-ment with that universal love which we all seek, and in the life and presence of which we all exist. Thus, I think we may say from the Buddhist discourses that Buddhism does not seek to destroy emotions, but to make them true and make them beautiful and give them the strange strength of quietude, which is the deep emotion. For when man is truly moved to his foundation, he is silent. But when he is not truly moved, he is loud and possibly argumentative. A man seeking the greatness of love finds as he finds all other greatness in silence, in the strange, deep experience of things. And it is this deep, silent experience which causes him to turn around and go forth and serve the world more lovingly and more wisely. Time is up. Now I'd like to make a few announcements at this time. We have on the table some material relating to Buddhism. We have some copies, second-hand books, of Edwin Arnold's Light of Asia, which is a beautiful expression of the Buddhist teaching. We also have lecture notes on the Taoist doctrine of transcendental idea, which has to do with this. And we have our own publications which would help in this matter, I think. One is Buddha's Sermon on the Mount, and the other is the commentary to the Chinese classic, The Quiet Way. And many persons have stated that they were greatly helped by this particular thought. Also in our series on the Adepts, we have one book or section on the Arhats of Buddhism, which we think you might also find helpful. And we have a number of used books on the table, which I think would be worth your looking at, because they're always something new and something helpful. And of course, through your purchase of these books, you also help us to carry on our activity. Next Sunday, we have something else. It's quite a contrast to this week, but some way I think is perhaps deeper than we realize. And that is, we're going to take up the subject of the psychological symbolism of humor. Nearly all persons in trouble have lost the ability to laugh at themselves and with others. We like to think that the neurotic person laughs at others, the wise person with them. Anything that causes misery to another cannot be humor. But humor has had a tremendous psychological influence. It also has a tremendous power to relax the individual away from tension. It has its own strange ministry and service. And the psychology of what causes humor, what is humor, how it has changed through the ages, and what it is doing with us and to us today, it seems to me, constitute together the justification for a lecture on this subject. So we hope you will all be here for the lecture on humor, and that you will come prepared to laugh with folks and not at them.